Kia ora. On this week's episode of Homefullness, I'm going to share about my own homefullness, at least a part of it. I was invited to write an article, and I decided to do a creative writing just to be a little bit more fun about it, and it's something that I'd like to share with you. So I'm going to read the article. It hasn't yet been published, hoping to be seen in the Good magazine, and I might see where else I can publish it. So this is called Homefullness, Recipes for Baking Belonging, Connection, and Resilience into Housing Futures. The article starts, I never thought it would happen to me. I had all the right ingredients for a stable life and secure home, but when the oven got too hot, those ingredients burned, and what was meant to be a nutritious meal emerged as dishes of housing instability and insecurity for me and my children. A recipe for homelessness, not a family favorite. Preparation. Prepare the kitchen with a new migrant family in Aotearoa with no extended family, limited friends, and no savings. Lay out all the ingredients. A master's degree, full-time professional job, a respected role in the community, good health, a long-term relationship, and home ownership. Prepare the oven with policies and laws that favor landlords, insecure tenancies, housing treated as an investment rather than a human right, land banking, an economy of rising rents, house prices, rates, and living costs. Directions. Break open one relationship. Add one single mother and 2 teenagers. Pour on a reduction of income. Mix in a pinch of affordable rental homes. Add dozens of people applying for every available rental. Measure 3 cups of rental discrimination against single mothers. Stir into an oiled pan of couch surfing, spare rooms, and overpriced Airbnbs. Bake at 1,000 degrees anxiety. Cook time. Dozens of hours spent scouring online listings, attending viewings, and filling out applications. While baking, prepare the dining room. Show up at work as if everything is fine. Juggle weekday rental visits with your job and teen school runs. Pack and unpack belongings into boxes and storage units. Remove from the oven when you win the lottery, or the local media cover your story and someone takes pity on you, or your parent dies and you get an inheritance. The portion size is 60 to 70% of household income, which is double the recommended daily allowance. The nutritional content, 0 calories of belonging, dignity, or security. High in saturated stress, financial hardship, and emotional exhaustion. Taste? Like injustice and embarrassment, bitter, dry, and basically inedible. So this homeless recipe was served up for me over a period of 4 years while living in Aotearoa. So homelessness for me has been a feeling, not a location or lack thereof. In my life, I've lived in 12 countries, professionally working as a diplomatic dependent and studying. Some of these countries were quite poor, but ironically, it's in one of the most well-off countries in the world, Aotearoa, that I have struggled with secure and adequate housing. Since arriving to Aotearoa in June of 2016, my housing experience has been more like a food truck, regularly on the move. I've lived in 16 places over these 9 years, most of that time with both or one of my children. And I say homeless for me is a feeling because I've always had a roof over my head and my children's heads. But in many cases, the roof was someone else's home with their rules. And having to ask, can I use the kitchen or the lounge? Can I have a guest over? Can I put something on the wall of my room? Feeling like a child. And in all of those places, my tenure was precarious. so I did not have a sense of stability. How did this happen? Well, as in the recipe, as I mentioned, I came to Aotearoa with a long-term relationship partner, and we did in fact own a house. We bought a house after the first year of being here with our combined income and savings. That was in Hamilton in 2016. But about a year after being in this country, my long-term partner, who was not the father of my children, decided that he would rather go traveling around the country in a camper van and exploring as a free person, and being in a house with 2 teenagers was just too much hard work for him. So he left, and then he insisted that he get the proceeds from the house so he could have his freedom, and that meant that after only 2 years of living in that house, barely just making time to do it up and make it look nice, we had to sell it. And we were forced to move out before we really could find anything else, and really couldn't afford very much because at this point I was on 1 income. Please note that the father of my children is in South Africa, and he is not able to contribute to the raising of the kids. So going back to this homelessness, having a roof but not really a home. So there were 16 different places that I have lived since 2016. When we first arrived, there was a rental house. After that year, we bought a house, which I owned for 2 years. When we sold it, I had 2 times couch surfing with friends, again, not being able to find a rental. 3 Airbnb rooms, sharing 1 room with my 2 kids, as we were trying to find a rental. 2 short-term house rentals from friends who had their houses available for a few weeks, again, while we were looking. We had 5 room rentals, so this is renting just a room, so being a roommate with the homeowners that are living in their house. I lived in a caravan with a yurt with my son, and eventually 1 tiny home on wheels, which I own, although the land lease where I am is temporary. So most of these places that we lived were just not ideal options. I would have preferred to own my own home or to even rent a house of my own. But with house prices the way they are and rental usually being more in demand than there is supply, it was really not easy to find, and hence moving around so often. So personal circumstances of being a single mother and the conditions of the market were really not in my favor. So for instance, after my long-term partner left and we were looking for rentals, I applied to pretty much every rental that looked like it would be suitable for my children and I, but was rejected from every single one, no matter how many nice letters that I wrote to the homeowners, really appealing to them and to my good character. For weeks, we would cycle through the spare rooms and the Airbnbs and moving our things all over the place. Really very discombobulating for myself and my kids. But eventually I turned to the media, and I got the New Zealand Herald and stuff to cover the plight from a systemic point of view, that as a professional working full-time and having already been a homeowner, having good mental health, all the things that should mean that somebody wouldn't find themselves homeless, that I was still unable to secure any rental. So the articles covered our story, and we were fortunate that someone did say they had just finished renovating or dividing their house in half, and we could rent the half of the house. Now, unfortunately, this was again a roommate agreement rather than a tenant agreement, because the homeowner was still living in the other half of the house, which meant that we did not get afforded the tenancy laws that otherwise would be available to people to give them protection. So it is up to a homeowner who is renting out part of their house to not have to adhere to tenancy laws by just creating a roommate agreement. And although I didn't want that, I didn't have much other choice. It was the only place that we had been offered. So we moved in, and for a time it was all right. But then, because he'd renovated with such thin wall dividers, and he seemed to be a bit unstable, or his relationship wasn't on good terms, so that in the middle of the night, between my bedroom and his was a very thin wall, I would be just startled awake with his violent outbursts, either screaming over the phone to his partner or in person. And this just went on despite me complaining about being woken up so abruptly, and my nervous system and that of my children really not coping. He was not amenable to doing very much about it. And so at that point, my daughter went off to university, and I decided to try living in a caravan and a yurt. I already owned the yurt, so I thought, well, it's just the caravan that I need. And someone offered me land to put our caravan and yurt in their paddock. And so I thought, all right, this will buy me some time, get away from this man who's kind of freaking us out, and being able to save a little bit of money for a year to see what then might become available. Unfortunately, this was also the time of COVID, and so it was lockdown, and as you know, everybody had to stay in place and form little bubbles. Well, I didn't have much of a bubble. I just had my son and I, and the home in which we were in the paddock, they were really not interested to combine their bubble with ours. So it left my son and I pretty out in the cold without being able him to go to school, me to go to work, us to go to the gym, or any of the other things that got us out of that small environment. So that really was a bad timing, and that really didn't work out at all. So eventually I decided to come and move down to Nelson, brought the yurt with me, but sold the caravan, and we came down to rent 2 rooms from a family where they had two rooms in their house. But again, given COVID, and house mortgage rates were actually too high for them. They'd bought this house that they thought that they could afford, and the mortgage rates rising meant that they couldn't keep it and they had to sell it. Again, being only roommates, we didn't have that kind of tenancy protection of the 60 or 90 days that's usually afforded for people to find another place. So we were given 2 weeks notice. And in that time, with my son and I, we just were not able to find another place to rent quick enough. So that was, again, where we ended up renting rooms from friends or couch surfing. Then we were offered 2 rooms in another family's house. And as she had children, I thought, well, this is good. It's another family. And it was fine for a while. Then my son had friends come around, and a bit of a misunderstanding of something that she'd heard outside from my son and his friends, which she misinterpreted. She had been drinking because I smelled it on her breath when I came home, and she greeted me very angrily at the door, accusing my son of all kinds of things that I know he hadn't done, and insisted that he meet with her face to face whenever he returned. I said we would, have a discussion, but when he came into the door, she immediately laid in on him with shouts and accusations, not allowing him a chance to even tell his side of the story. Eventually, I said, let's retire this for the evening, and let's speak about it in the morning when everybody's fresh. At that point, it was 10 o'clock at night. So we retired to our section of the house, and my son went to go take a shower and me to bed, when she burst into our part of the house and was shouting at my son through the bathroom door that he must come out and he must talk with her. Now, unfortunately, my son was trying to appease her, hoping that if he did come out, she would calm down. Unfortunately, it got worse. And my son is of African ethnicity, adopted him in South Africa. And then she started on some racial slurs, using racial language. I recorded this on my phone, and eventually she left the space, but my son was left pretty traumatized by it, and so was I, very shaken. And I eventually did end up getting the Office of Human Rights proceedings to take our case because we had to leave that house so quickly. Again, we had nowhere else to go. After that event, we tried to leave quite quickly. We felt quite insecure there, or unsafe. But it took almost a year before the Office of Human Rights was able to send us a lawyer and set up a mediation where we were able to come to a mediation agreement where she was paying us back that which the court had ordered her to pay, which she hadn't paid. So we took her to court and also to the Office of Human Rights proceedings. So that was a whole year drawn out of that trauma having to replay itself over and over. And yeah, that still sits with my son and I today, that how we felt in that home, very unsafe. So around that time, unfortunately, my mother passed in 2021. And I found about that time that my mother had left me an inheritance. So although it was a difficult time, I was excited to see what I could do with this inheritance. It was enough to get a nice tiny home, but really not enough at all with the cost of housing in my area to afford to get sort of like what would call a conventional home. So because I was quite desperate to not be living in somebody else's house under somebody else's rules, I decided to go the tiny home route, knowing, though, that it was going to be quite difficult to find land on which to put it. I'd heard other stories from people who had tiny homes that were battling either with council or with the landowners where they had put their homes, that neither one was really a secure place. So I did take that into consideration, but again, it seemed to be at a point of desperation where I'd been 2 years moving around to 16 different places, and I was really just ready to have my own place. So luckily, as you might know, that I was offered land to lease at the Riverside community, and I was able to move my home here, actually having it built the year before, moving it here in April 2023, where I signed a lease of 2 years with an extension where I have been able to be. So now it's November 2025, and I have to move April 2026. So I'm again in that space of needing to figure out what to do with my tiny home and looking around. Now, going back to the bigger picture, because my case is a micro experience of what is actually a macro system of housing that is broken. So I'm a single mother, so there's lots of other women who are single mothers who are in a similar circumstance or even worse. And there's other people that are, whether they're elderly, whether they're new migrants, all kinds of different scenarios, leaves people in a similar experience, a similar homelessness recipe. Maybe they have a roof over their head, but they might not actually feel like they've got a home or that security of home or a place that they can really relax and feel comfortable because it's shared with somebody that they wouldn't necessarily choose to live with if they had other options. So what we have is a broken system. So we have a rental system that actually doesn't have great tenancy laws, and it does favor homeowners. We don't have a lot of affordable 1 and 2 bedroom homes. Mostly developers are building 3 and 4 bedroom homes, which is more than what a single person would need. Market prices, as we have seen, has skyrocketed way faster than incomes, and it's now in Aotearoa double, triple, or even quadruple what is the universally accepted standard for the affordable cost of housing, which is a third of one's income. So if one is renting or buying, what one is spending on housing is supposed to be only a third. And in New Zealand, it can be 50 to 75% of somebody's income, meaning that they end up in housing poverty because all of their money is going to pay for their living. They've got not much left for all the other things. And many people are in this housing poverty where we don't notice that they're homeless. They're not on the street as one was used to seeing, but they live in such precarity that it feels like homelessness is around the corner. And we've also got a government that does not recognize housing as a human right and that treats it as a commodity. So in 2019, we had the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing come. Her name is Leilani Farha. And in February 2020, she wrote a report about the fact that our housing crisis is a human rights crisis. So she went around the country for weeks and interviewed people from different organizations and different communities, people experiencing it, as well as people in the policy level. And what she states in her quite long report, which I will make a link to, I've just chosen this one phrase, which is that our human housing crisis is a human rights crisis. This is due to insufficient expression of this right in law, in related policy and programs, and in their implementation. These conditions would never have arisen to this extent had housing been fully understood, recognized, and implemented by governments as a human right and a social good, rather than as an asset for wealth accumulation and growth over the last decades. So that was after she'd already talked about all the statistics of what she found to be our housing problems for all the people. So, and then some have believed that if we just build more, then we'll eliminate these problems, but there's nuances to that building more. And obviously we don't see the building more. We see actually a building less. We see Kainga Ora, which is our government's housing. The government has cut a lot of the planned houses to be built. Developers are not developing as much. And we just, it's not the way to go about it. So we also do have a lot of housing in this country, but it's quite often empty. So if you're in a beautiful holiday location, you might notice a whole bunch of houses. Well, if it's during a holiday, you'll see people in them. But if it's not a holiday, you'll see a lot of empty houses. So what needs transforming is the housing system itself that rewards, a system that does reward speculation, and it undervalues renters. It ignores the collective housing solutions, and that I'll go into further detail, the collective housing being how future residents can help to design their own intentional communities. And there's different tenure types, and there's different ways of using the land and those collective models that the government, either local governments or the central government, has not been helpful to support. And we also have this developer-driven one-size-fits-all housing type, which doesn't accommodate the diversity of kinds of people and the housing models that we would like to have available for the diverse range of people and family types that are in Aotearoa. So in her mission report, Ms. Farah does spell out all the things that could be fixed. She gives the government quite a talking to and has a lot of recommendations. So that's a great place if you are interested in advocacy or policy work. That's a good document to draw upon because she does spell out the solutions are there, what would create enough adequate housing for everyone in Aotearoa if the government were to care about such a thing. So I'm really interested. It's why I started this podcast called Homefullness. And what it is about is shifting the narrative on housing. And I also was countering the word of homelessness because there's a lot that's going on to eliminate homelessness. But a lot of people are actually caught in the middle. They're having a roof over their head, so they don't really fit maybe even the income criteria, but they don't fit other criteria that make them kind of be eligible for homelessness services, but yet they're not at the place of really feeling like they have a secure or adequate home. So this is what we're looking to do, is shifting this narrative to bring about homefullness. And how do we address this across the spectrum? I would love us to move beyond adequate, really define the way that we want to live as thriving. So we need to shift this narrative to thriving in resilience, where housing moves from being considered an investment to housing being about belonging, from land as a commodity to land as a life-giving commons, from affordability that's tied to market rates to rather defining affordability as no more than a third of a household's income, and from thinking about isolated houses to living neighborhoods that are designed with people, connection, and nature at the center. So collective housing is what's missing from our housing spectrum in Aotearoa. So at the one end, if we talk about a spectrum, we have emergency and transitional housing and social housing run by governments and community housing providers at the one end, with conventional market ownership and rentals, sort of the mainstream at the other end. And in the middle, which crosses over, is this place of greatest potential, which is collective housing, such as models you might have heard co-housing, where houses are clustered and then you have a community house that's shared and some common lands in between, and there's a lot of other shared facilities built into that neighborhood. There's cooperative housing, which is again a tenure type, a way of owning a share in a housing company, and people give permission to occupy units. We have community land trust, which is a tenure where the not-for-profit owns the land and people own just the housing that's on it, and it has a retained affordability aspect. We have co-living, where we might have houses that are built so that there's individual bathrooms and maybe even kitchenettes, but people share a main house. We have eco-villages, agri-hoods or agri-villages, circular economy village, tiny home community, and such. So all of these are community-focused houses and neighborhoods. They have elements of shared resources, common areas, resident voice, and agency in design and management. Shared values quite often around affordability and sustainability. According to the New Zealand Housing Survey's Year 1 survey results released in September 2025, respondents said that they would be interested in other forms of housing. So out of the 2,500 respondents, 59% said co-housing was of interest to them. 32% said rental cooperatives were of interest, and 29% said community land trusts. Yet in Aotearoa, collective housing makes up less than 0.5% of what is available. It is time now for government legislation and funding, developer offerings, bank lending, and local government regulations to step up to enable these kinds of models to take root and grow. So this is where we're trying to shift not only the narrative, but all the system players that play their part in making it happen. And I talk about a great document where there's outlined ways that we can go about bringing all these role players together. The document is called How We Live, Housing That Puts People and Planet First. That was published by Motif, and I can make a link to that in the show notes. Now, to accompany this article, I have created an informative document on the collective housing models and case studies, the research and links, and the other resources that I'm going to be mentioning in this article. So I will make that available through a link in the show notes. So in my ideal homefullness day, what it would look like in my future house and neighborhood, my partner and I live in a house designed by permaculture principles made of natural materials such as hemp and wood. It has a composting toilet, is powered by the sun and renewable energy, and has water catchment and gray water recycling. It's a living building that connects to the land, which provides sustenance through an abundant ecosystem of biodiverse plants serving multiple functions, as food gardens, a pharmacy of healing plants, firewood, biomass, and pollinator habitat. But the true feeling of home is in the neighborhood. A cooperative or community land trust stewards the land and provides security of tenure. We share gardens, workshops, tools, internet service, and other shared resources. Children play freely in the common areas. We come together in weekly and seasonal rhythms for learning activities, social gatherings, working bees, and weekly meals are made and shared in the multifunctional community house. Morning begins with the sound of birds, not cars, because the cars are parked at the outskirt of the community. I then walk to work to the shared workshop, making something, or to the studio to record an episode of my podcast. I take a midday walk to the community-supported agriculture farm for vegetables and fruit from the orchard and to get bulk ingredients from the on-site food co-op. Afternoons and evenings are filled with collaborative projects with passionate people, such as potlucks, drama and dance activities, music group making, conscious communication practice, crafting, preserving, or strategizing on new projects for the community. Now, I have made 2 recipes for Homefullness, depending on where you find yourself. So let's toss that unnutritious recipe of homelessness and substitute it for the hearty recipes of Homefullness. So Homefullness in Situ, which is how to transform an existing neighborhood into a more connected, regenerative place to live. Preparation. Begin with your current home, apartment, and those around you. Next, invite curiosity, patience, and imagination. Ingredients. 1 cup of values that are most important to you, such as belonging, sustainability, cooperation, peace. 2 to 3 neighbors open to connection. Shared spaces, a garden, a driveway, a spare room, or even a WhatsApp group. Skills and resources you're willing to exchange, a shared list of needs and offers. And local networks, councils, libraries, schools, and community groups. Next, have your instructions. Start with conversations. What do you value? What could be shared? What feels possible? What do you need? What do you have to offer? What would make our neighborhood more wonderful? 2, plant something together, literally or figuratively. 3, create rituals, shared meals, working bees, celebrations. 4, build resilience, organize bulk buying, tool libraries, car shares, savings pools. 5, slowly add layers of trust and collaboration. 6, practice compassionate language patterns and address conflict, such as taking personal responsibility for one's own feelings, giving empathy, and listening to understand. Avoiding toxic communication that shames, blames, avoids, ridicules, judges, etc. The temperature. Set to low-medium sharing. Increase gradually as comfort grows. Cooking time. Ongoing with patience. Taste. Feels like connection, support, and possibility. Now for the second Homefullness recipe, which is called Homefullness Collective from Scratch, how to create a neighborhood or an intentional community from the ground up. So preparation, you'll want to gather a group of like-hearted people. Accept that this is ambitious but possible. Do lots of research and spend time in other collective housing neighborhoods to get the look and feel. And learn aspects of what makes these successful communities and practice these skills. The ingredients: shared values, access to land or property, favorable legal and financial structures, governance, membership, and conflict resolution systems, experienced professionals to guide and design the development. Built environment shaped by permaculture and regenerative principles. Ongoing education and skill building. So the instructions. 1, begin with values: social, environmental, financial, ecological, design, etc. Meet regularly to shape the vision into practical agreements. 3, secure land through a cooperative or a trust structure. 4, engage architects, planners, and advisors familiar with collective housing models. 5, develop governance and decision-making systems before you need them. 6, build in phases, grow community alongside the buildings. Temperature. Heat the oven to medium-high depending on willingness to share and collaborate. The cooking time. Several years. Allow to simmer with care. Cooking time can vary and be quicker if there are paid chefs involved, skilled in this type of collecting housing development, and if council and other cooks in the kitchen are favorable to enabling innovative housing models. The taste? A rich stew of warm, belonging, flavorful independence, and spicy flourishing. I've been working in the kitchen of Homefullness for a number of years with the social enterprise Common Ground, and now through this podcast. And in the last 6 years, I've done a lot of things that have been fueled by the challenges that I faced with homelessness, as well as being on a mission to create and advance homefullness. And I've been doing this through the following means. I set up the Common Ground Consultancy to support leaders and groups with knowledge, skills, and resources to create thriving neighborhoods and workplaces. And I can do group process, conflict transformation, community engagement, and regenerative strategies for clients. I have produced the Homefullness Show over the last year and a half with a podcast and a YouTube playlist where we have change-making conversations to showcase innovation on housing for people and planet. There's also the Patreon community, which is set up for like-minded people around this idea of people getting together to share their ideas, finding each other in that space. I have been running the Women Revolutionizing Housing Hui, with the third one being this year in November 20, bringing women together who are wanting either to lead or to live in such collective housing to share ideas and inspiration, support each other. There is the Housing Innovation Society, where I've sat as a community member for a number of years. It's just an incorporated society which advocates and advances for collective housing, and it's also been hosting the Coho Hui. I've worked with the Housing Older Women movement in Queensland, Australia, where I was able to facilitate a month-long community engagement program over 6 regional areas with their My Home, Your Home, Our Homes model around collective housing and community land trusts. I have helped a few councils in Australia and New Zealand with regenerative housing strategies to look at broadening how they think about housing in their communities. And I helped to set up the Waikato Community Lands Trust, which was the first community land trust established in New Zealand for the region of Waikato to provide retained affordability of housing. And that's working in partnership with Habitat for Humanity. There is a website now set up for that, but there's also a report that I wrote on the feasibility, which other council areas could use to help set up a similar CLT. And I also have a report on the website on housing for ethnic women and families in New Zealand. There is a presentation that goes along with this, and I'm happy to come to communities to both give the presentation and workshop to help communities to better respond and providing better housing for ethnic women and communities. And there's also been the Society for Cooperative Housing, because at the moment we don't have the legislation for it. And so we were looking to advance that. There is a PhD graduate that I interviewed on the podcast, Sophie Goossens, on the cooperative model and what it would take to make that a reality for Aotearoa. So highly recommend you listen to that episode. Finally, we end with a call to action for you, my dear listeners, as to what you can do wherever you are, however you're able, to do something towards more homefullness for yourself as well as for your neighbors. Because the current chefs in charge of dishing up housing in Aotearoa, they don't seem to care that their kitchens are churning out recipes of burnt, stale, and unpalatable morsels of homelessness. So whatever your role, wherever you are, there's something each of us can do to bake homefullness into our projects, our lives, our communities, our workplaces, and our social and economic systems. So you can check out the companion resource that I will make available in the show notes, where you can get the recipes and all the other links. But here's some things that you can do starting now. So 1, try it for yourself. Look at the Homefullness Institute recipe and see what you can do as a start. Or dream bigger and look at being a part of an intentional community. Explore the Homefullness Collective recipe and the companion resource. Lead where you are Is your role in council or government, construction, building policy, finance, development, or community? Well, what can you help to do to unlock barriers and create innovation? Stay connected. Please subscribe to the Common Ground newsletter and the socials to get updates on resources, opportunities, and events. Join the movement. Become part of the Patreon community for us to shift the narrative together. Listen to the stories on the Homefullness show for great models of what is working. Participate in the Coho Hui, the Women Revolutionizing Housing Hui, and maybe create some regional events with people who are interested in your area. Experience. How about you visit some collective housing neighborhoods, either in Aotearoa or around the world? You can go to the Foundation for Intentional Community to find a wide range of communities around the world. You can also go to the Global Eco-Village Network, which also has around the world communities that regularly run tours and allow for different kinds of ways to be there as a visitor, including work exchange. And learn and definitely practice these skills that help you to be a better neighbor. There are organizations that offer all of these different skill sets around the social, ecological, cultural, financial, legal skills that you'd need to be a great neighbor. And as I mentioned, the Global Eco-Village Network and the Foundation for Intentional Community are just two of the places that allow you to take short courses and be able to practice these skills. So in ending, one of my favorite people who is an anthropologist, that's what I studied at university, her name is Margaret Mead, and you've probably heard her saying before, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And there's good old Dr. Seuss with the Lorax. Unless somebody like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. So you can be that person that brings homefullness to yourself, to your community, and to the wider world. I look forward to hearing about which recipe you decide to try and what are the results. What does it taste like and look like for you? Thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to hearing your suggestions on what you'd like to hear in the future. Kia ora.